The first transmission from the Kepler 442b colony had been routine. Weekly status reports, crop yields, population growth. Sarah Chun remembered reviewing them in her office at the United Earth Colonial Administration, sipping coffee while watching the data stream scroll past. Everything normal. Everything peaceful. The second transmission never came. Sarah stood in the communications center now, 3 weeks later, staring at the massive holographic display showing the void where Kepler 442b should be broadcasting. Around her, technicians worked frantically, adjusting frequencies, boosting signal strength, checking and rechecking their equipment. The silence from humanity's newest colony was deafening. Director Chun called Marcus Webb, the lead communications officer. His voice carried an edge that made Sarah's stomach clench. "We're receiving something." The main display flickered to life, showing a transmission source moving through the Kepler system. Not from the planet, from space. As the image clarified, Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. It was a ship, massive, crystalline, beautiful in its alien geometry. And it was broadcasting. The being that appeared on screen was tall, elegant, with features that seemed carved from living marble. Its eyes were pools of shifting silver, and, when it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that made the human ear ache. "Greetings, species of the third planet of Sol," the alien said, its mouth barely moving while words somehow formed in perfect English. "I am High Executor Zeth Kree of the Hegemony Purification Fleet. Your colony in this system has been cleansed of biological contamination. We have studied your kind during this process." Sarah's hands gripped the railing so hard her knuckles went white. Around her, the communications center had gone absolutely silent. Every person stared at the screen in growing horror. "You are what we classify as a base species," Zeth Kree continued, its expression never changing from that serene, almost bored look. "Primitive, violent, chaotic. Your biology is inefficient. Your social structures are flawed. Your technology is crude. You spread across worlds like a plague, consuming resources and multiplying without purpose or control." The alien paused, and Sarah could swear she saw something like amusement in those silver eyes. "We have encountered many such species. The solution is always the same. Cleansing. Purification. The galaxy is vast, but it is not infinite. Space exists for only the worthy. The hegemony has determined that humanity is not worthy." The transmission continued for another few minutes, with Zeth Kree explaining in clinical detail how the hegemony would systematically eradicate human colonies before moving to Earth itself. How they had done this to 47 other base species across the galaxy. How it was their sacred duty to cleanse the universe of inferior life forms. When the transmission ended, the communications center remained silent for a long moment. Then, someone started crying. Quiet sobs that seemed to echo in the vast chamber. Sarah Chun had been with the Colonial Administration for 15 years. She had seen disasters, accidents, the occasional equipment failure that cost lives. But this was different. This was deliberate, calculated, cold. She thought about the colony on Kepler 442b. 12,000 people, families, children, scientists and farmers and teachers and engineers who had traveled 47 light years to build something new and beautiful. All of them gone, murdered by beings who considered them insects to be stepped on. "Director," Marcus said quietly, "what do we do?" Sarah looked around the room at the faces of her staff. Fear, shock, despair. But, underneath it all, she saw something else beginning to form. Something harder. Something dangerous. "We contact Earth," she said. "All of Earth. Every government, every military, every corporation with a ship. We tell them what happened here. And then?" Sarah thought about her daughter, away at university on Luna. About her grandchildren playing in the parks of New Geneva. About every human being in the Sol system, going about their lives, unaware that alien beings had just declared them unworthy of existence. "Then, we remind the galaxy why Earth has never been successfully invaded," she said. The emergency session of the United Earth Council convened 8 hours later. Representatives from every nation, colony, and corporate entity crowded into the Great Assembly Hall in New York. The air was thick with tension and barely controlled fury. Admiral Catherine Morrison stood at the podium, her uniform crisp despite having been awakened at 3 in the morning for this crisis. Behind her, the recording of Zeth Kree played on loop, its words echoing through the chamber with each repetition. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Morrison began when the recording finished. "We are at war." The statement was simple, but it carried weight that made the room seem to vibrate. "War," Humanity had not fought a real war in nearly a century. The peace of 2157 had ended the last of the corporate conflicts, and, since then, Earth's military had focused on exploration, protection, and the occasional rescue mission. The hegemony has killed 12,000 of our people, Morrison continued. They have announced their intention to commit genocide against our entire species. They believe we are inferior. They believe we are weak. The Admiral's voice grew harder with each word. They are about to learn otherwise. Over the next 72 hours, Earth transformed. The great shipyards above Luna and Mars roared to life, their automated systems working around the clock to retrofit civilian vessels for war. The research stations of Europa and Titan redirected their efforts from pure science to weapons development. The mining colonies of the asteroid belt began shipping raw materials to Earth at unprecedented rates. Dr. Elena Vasquez sat in her laboratory beneath CERN, surrounded by holographic displays showing particle interactions that would have been incomprehensible to scientists just decades earlier. She had been working on quantum entanglement communication when the crisis began. Now, she was weaponizing it. The beauty of quantum entanglement, she explained to her team, is that it's instantaneous across any distance. If we can entangle particles in our weapons with particles in their ships, her chief researcher, Dr. Kim, finished the thought, we can disrupt their quantum states from here, cause catastrophic failures in their technology. Exactly. But that's just the beginning. Elena pulled up another display showing theoretical physics that bordered on the impossible. If the hegemony thinks we're primitive, let's show them what human creativity can accomplish when we're properly motivated. Across Earth's solar system, similar scenes played out in laboratories, military bases, and research facilities. Humanity's greatest minds turned their attention to a single problem: how to kill beings who considered themselves superior. The answer, as it turned out, lay in humanity's greatest strength. Not superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but something the hegemony had dismissed as a weakness: unpredictability. General Hassan al-Rashid studied tactical displays in the war room deep beneath the Pentagon. Around him, military leaders from every Earth nation worked together for the first time in living memory. Old rivalries and territorial disputes seemed petty in the face of extinction. Their tactics are efficient, he said, highlighting the hegemony's previous campaigns. Methodical. They follow patterns. They cleanse systems in order of proximity to jump points. They always approach from the outer system and work inward. They've done this 47 times, and they've done it the same way every time. Predictable, said General Li of the Chinese Space Force. Exactly. They expect us to respond conventionally, to try to meet them in open battle, to fight like every other species they've encountered. General al-Rashid smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. They have no idea what humans do when backed into a corner. The hegemony fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system exactly 17 days after their transmission. 50 ships, each one massive and gleaming, moving in perfect formation toward the outer planets. They had done this dozens of times before. They knew how it would go. They were wrong. The first sign that something was different came when they reached Neptune's orbit. Their sensors detected no defending fleet, no fortifications, no obvious preparations for battle, just empty space and the normal traffic of a system going about its business. High Executor Zeth Kree stood on the command deck of the flagship, studying the displays with growing confusion. In every previous cleansing, the target species had responded predictably. They gathered their forces. They tried to negotiate. They made desperate last stands at choke points. The humans were doing none of these things. Scan for stealth vessels, Zeth Kree ordered. Scanning complete, High Executor. No contacts. What about the asteroid belt? Normal mining operations detected. No military signatures. Zeth Kree's silver eyes narrowed. 47 species had taught the hegemony much about the patterns of inferior life. When faced with extinction, they always fought, always struggled, always revealed themselves through their desperate preparations for war. The humans appeared to be ignoring them entirely. Perhaps they have not received our message, suggested Sub-Executor Veltar. Impossible. Our transmission was clear. They acknowledged receipt. Then they surrender? Zeth Kree considered this. It was possible. Some species, when faced with the inevitability of cleansing, simply gave up, accepted their fate. It made the process more efficient, though less satisfying. Continue the approach, he ordered. Maintain standard formation. Prepare cleansing protocols for the fourth planet. Mars hung in space ahead of them, red and defiant, its terraforming stations glinting in the distant sunlight. According to their intelligence, it housed nearly 50 million humans, a significant population center, the perfect place to begin the cleansing and demonstrate hegemony power. The fleet moved forward, confident in their superiority, certain in their purpose. They had cleansed 47 species. The 48th would be no different. They were about to discover that humans had spent the last 3 weeks learning everything they could about hegemony technology, tactics, and psychology. And, unlike the previous 47 species, humans had something the hegemony had never encountered, a talent for creative destruction that bordered on artistic. The attack, when it came, did not come from space. It came from Mars itself. Dr. Vasquez had spent 72 hours without sleep, surviving on stimulants and fury, perfecting her quantum entanglement weapon. What she had created was not just a weapon, but a violation of physics so elegant and terrible that it would have made her weep if she had time for tears. As the hegemony fleet approached Mars, she activated the device. Across the vast distance of space, quantum-entangled particles embedded in the hegemony ships suddenly found their paired particles undergoing violent state changes. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Crystalline hulls began to resonate at frequencies that tore them apart from within. Power cores designed to channel exotic matter destabilized. Navigation systems that relied on quantum positioning suddenly lost all reference points. 5 hegemony ships simply disintegrated in the span of 10 seconds. High Executor Zethkri felt his flagship shudder as quantum destabilization waves swept through its systems. Emergency alarms screamed in harmonics that hurt his sensitive hearing. Around him, his crew struggled to understand what was happening. "Report," he commanded. "Unknown weapon effect. High Executor. We're losing structural integrity. Source: unknown. No projectile detected. No energy beam. The effect appears to be originating from within our own hulls." For the first time in his long life, Zethkri felt something he had never experienced before: uncertainty. The cleansing of inferior species was supposed to be routine, simple, predictable. This was none of those things. "Pull back to safe distance," he ordered. "Analyze the weapon." But, even as his fleet retreated, more attacks began. Not from Mars now, but from the asteroid belt. Rocks and ice chunks that had been drifting peacefully through space suddenly lit up with hidden engines and began accelerating toward the hegemony ships. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Each one moving at velocities that should have been impossible for such primitive technology. Each one aimed with precision that suggested intelligence far beyond what the hegemony had credited to humans. Evasive maneuvers. Zethkri commanded. His ships began to dodge, their perfect formation dissolving into chaos as they tried to avoid the incoming swarm of kinetic projectiles. It should have been easy. The hegemony ships were fast, maneuverable, equipped with point defense systems that could destroy incoming threats. But there were too many projectiles. And they were not behaving like simple kinetic weapons. They were adjusting course, splitting into smaller pieces, coordinating with each other in patterns that spoke of distributed intelligence. The first projectile to strike a hegemony ship punched through its hull like it was made of paper. The second triggered a chain reaction that turned the elegant crystalline vessel into an expanding cloud of debris. The third carried something worse than explosives, a computer virus specifically designed to interface with hegemony technology. Dr. Maria Santos had been humanity's leading expert on xenoarchaeology before the crisis. Now, she was its leading expert on genocide. The virus she had created was a work of art, a piece of self-modifying code that could learn and adapt to alien computer systems faster than any organic mind could respond. As it spread through the hegemony fleet's communication networks, it began rewriting fundamental control protocols. Navigation systems started reporting false positions. Weapons targeting began firing on friendly vessels. Life support systems began cycling randomly. But, perhaps most importantly, the virus began broadcasting. Every piece of data in the hegemony's computers, every tactical plan, every technological specification, every detail of their previous 47 genocides was transmitted back to Earth in a continuous stream. High Executor Zethkri watched his perfect fleet dissolve into chaos and felt something he had not experienced in centuries of cleansing: fear. Not just uncertainty now, but actual fear. The humans were not fighting like any species the hegemony had encountered. They were not even fighting like a single species. They were fighting like 48 different species all at once. Every tactic that had failed against the hegemony in the past was being used simultaneously, but modified, improved, combined with human creativity and human rage into something unprecedented. The quantum weapons that disrupted exotic matter. The swarm tactics that overwhelmed point defenses. The computer viruses that turned hegemony technology against itself. And, underneath it all, a level of coordination and communication that should have been impossible for such a primitive species. High Executor, his communications officer reported, we're receiving a transmission from the third planet. Earth? Yes, High Executor. The main display activated, showing not a single human face, but dozens. A collective of Earth's leaders, scientists, and military commanders. At the center stood Admiral Morrison, her expression cold as vacuum. High Executor Zethkri, she said. You made a mistake. We do not make mistakes, Zethkri replied, though his voice lacked its earlier certainty. You killed our people. Admiral Morrison continued as if he had not spoken. You announced your intention to commit genocide against our species. You called us inferior, primitive, unworthy. Around Morrison, the other humans remained silent, but their expressions spoke volumes. This was not just the military speaking. This was all of humanity. You were correct about one thing, Morrison said. We are violent. We are chaotic. When we are threatened, we become something terrible. The display shifted, showing real-time footage from across the Sol system. Massive construction projects that had been completed in just 3 weeks. Weapons that violated known physics. Ships being built at impossible speeds. And, most disturbing of all, humans working together with a unity and purpose that spoke of a species that had found its true enemy. You have studied 47 species, Morrison said. You have perfected the art of genocide. You believe yourselves to be the apex of evolution, the ultimate expression of life in the galaxy. She paused, and, when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of Earth's entire 4-billion-year history of evolution, survival, and war. Now you face the species that has spent its entire existence learning how to kill things that consider themselves superior to us. You face the species that turned warfare into an art form, that made survival a science, that transformed the very concept of impossible into a challenge to be overcome. The transmission ended, leaving High Executor Zethkri staring at a blank screen. Around him, his flagship continued to shake as quantum weapons tore at its structure and computer viruses corrupted its systems. His perfect fleet was scattered, damaged, demoralized. For the first time in hegemony history, a cleansing operation was not going according to plan. Zethkri looked at his tactical displays and realized with growing horror that the humans had not yet begun to fight seriously. Everything they had done so far, the quantum weapons, the swarm attacks, the cyber warfare, had been just the opening moves. The real war was about to begin. And, for the first time in his long life, High Executor Zethkri wondered if the hegemony had finally found something in the galaxy that was more dangerous than they were. High Executor Zethkri had overseen 47 cleansings. He understood the patterns of inferior species when faced with extinction. They panicked. They made desperate attempts at negotiation. They threw their forces into futile last stands that served only to demonstrate their inevitable defeat. The humans were doing none of these things. Instead, they were hunting. The first hegemony ship to disappear vanished during what should have been a routine scouting mission near Jupiter. The vessel simply stopped responding to communication, its quantum signature fading from sensors as if it had never existed. Search parties found only debris, crystalline fragments that showed signs of molecular dissolution from the inside out. How is this possible? Sub-Executor Veltar asked, studying the forensic reports. Our ships are constructed from purified threnite crystal. It's impervious to all known forms of molecular attack. Zethkri studied the data with growing unease. The humans had somehow found a way to make the hegemony's greatest strength into a weakness. Their ships' crystalline hulls, designed to channel and focus exotic energies, were being turned against them by weapons that attacked the very atomic bonds that held the crystal matrix together. Begin emergency protocols, he ordered. Withdraw to the outer system. Establish defensive perimeter. Request immediate reinforcement from the core worlds. It was the first time in hegemony history that a cleansing operation had required reinforcements. Dr. Yuki Tanaka had been studying materials science when the hegemony arrived. Now she was studying how to murder aliens with their own technology. Her expression hardened. We are going to show you what true monsters look like. The transmission ended, leaving Zethkri staring at a blank screen. For the first time in his long life, the High Executor understood what his victims had felt in their final moments. Not just fear of death, but the terrible realization that the universe was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The humans were not just going to destroy the hegemony fleet. They were going to make them understand exactly what they had done to 47 other species. And then, they were going to do something far worse. They were going to ensure that the galaxy never forgot the lesson. Deep in the human fleet, Admiral Morrison was coordinating the next phase of operations. Around her, Earth's greatest military minds worked with scientists, philosophers, and historians to plan something unprecedented in galactic history. The hegemony believes in cleansing, Morrison said to her staff. They believe in the elimination of chaos and imperfection. They've spent millennia creating a perfect, ordered universe. She gestured to the tactical displays showing the positions of human forces throughout the solar system. Ships, weapons platforms, scientific installations, all of it coordinated into a single vast organism dedicated to warfare. We're going to give them chaos. We're going to give them imperfection. We're going to show them that their perfect order is just another form of death. The plan that emerged from Earth's war councils was unlike anything in the history of warfare. It was not designed simply to defeat the hegemony. It was designed to traumatize them so thoroughly that they would never again consider themselves superior to any other species. Phase 1 had been defensive, learning to survive hegemony attacks, and turning their weapons against them. Phase 2 had been adaptive, capturing ships, studying technology, understanding the enemy. Phase 3 would be educational. The humans were going to teach the hegemony what it meant to be hunted by something that considered you inferior. Dr. Liu had been studying the captured hegemony crews with the same clinical detachment that the aliens had once used to study their victims. What she found was a species that had evolved beyond the normal psychological defense mechanisms that allowed beings to cope with trauma, loss, and uncertainty. They're psychologically fragile, she reported. Perfect environments, perfect technology, perfect social order. They've never had to develop resilience because they've never encountered anything they couldn't control. How fragile? Admiral Morrison asked. Completely. Expose them to genuine uncertainty, and they suffer immediate psychological collapse. Show them chaos they can't understand, and they simply shut down. Morrison nodded slowly. Then, we'll show them chaos. The weapons being prepared for Phase 3 were not designed to kill. They were designed to teach. Each one embodied a different lesson about the nature of fear, uncertainty, and helplessness. Dr. Wright's latest gravitational weapon could trap enemy ships in localized time distortions, where minutes stretched into hours and crews aged years while trying to escape. Dr. Tanaka's molecular disruptors had been modified to work slowly, allowing enemy crews to watch their ships dissolve around them molecule by molecule. But perhaps the most cruel weapon was Dr. Foster's psychological warfare system, which had been refined to broadcast the final transmissions of the 47 species the hegemony had cleansed. For beings who had never experienced guilt or empathy, the voices of their victims would be a form of torture beyond their comprehension. The human fleet began moving toward the hegemony positions near Saturn, but they did not attack immediately. Instead, they began broadcasting. Every human ship transmitted the same message simultaneously, not in words, but in mathematics. Complex equations that described impossible geometries, paradoxical relationships, theoretical frameworks that violated the hegemony's understanding of reality. The effect on the alien crews was immediate and devastating. Beings who had lived their entire lives in perfect order suddenly found themselves confronted with chaos that their minds could not process. Some began screaming. Others simply stopped functioning entirely, their consciousness retreating from a reality that no longer made sense. But the humans were not finished. As the hegemony fleet struggled to cope with the psychological assault, human ships began moving between them, not attacking, but simply observing, studying, recording. The message was clear. You are no longer the hunters. You are the specimens. You are the ones being studied by a superior species. High Executor Zethkri tried desperately to maintain order among his remaining crews, but it was hopeless. The humans had found a weapon more devastating than any physical force. They had introduced uncertainty into minds that had no capacity to cope with it. Status report, he demanded. 7 ships completely non-responsive, his tactical officer reported, his voice shaking. Crews in complete psychological shutdown. For more ships reporting system-wide malfunctions as crew members attempt to escape what they perceive as reality distortions. And our weapons. Non-functional. Every time we attempt to target human vessels, our targeting systems begin processing impossible mathematical relationships that crash our computers. Zethkri stared at the tactical display, watching his perfect fleet dissolve into chaos. The humans were not destroying them quickly and cleanly, as the hegemony had destroyed so many others. They were taking them apart slowly, systematically, ensuring that every moment of the experience would be seared into hegemony memory. This was not warfare. This was education. And the lesson was simple. This is what it feels like to be helpless. This is what it feels like to face something you cannot understand or control. This is what you did to 47 other species. The transmission from Earth came through on emergency frequencies, bypassing all hegemony communication protocols. High Executor Zeth Kree. Sarah Chen's voice echoed through his dying fleet. We want you to understand something. We could destroy you instantly. We have weapons that could turn your ships to vapor, crush you with gravity, or dissolve you at the molecular level. But we're not going to do that. The transmission paused, letting the implications sink in. We're going to keep you alive. We're going to let you experience everything you put other species through. We're going to let you feel helpless, inferior, unworthy of existence. And when you finally understand what you've done, we're going to send you home. Home, Zeth Kree whispered. To tell your people what happens when they threaten humanity. To explain to your perfect, ordered civilization that there is something in the galaxy that is more dangerous than they are. To ensure that the hegemony never forgets the lesson we're about to teach them. The screen went dark, leaving Zeth Kree alone with the understanding that this was only the beginning. The humans were not just defending themselves. They were preparing to become exactly what the hegemony feared most. A chaotic, unpredictable force that could not be controlled, understood, or defeated. They were about to become the galaxy's apex predator. And they were going to teach the universe that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology, or their weapons, or their unity. It was their imagination when it came to making their enemies suffer. Laboratory on Europa had become a foundry of impossible weapons, each one designed around a single principle. If the hegemony considered their technology perfect, then perfection itself would become their weakness. The beauty of crystalline technology, she explained to her team as they prepared the next wave of molecular disruptors, is that it relies on perfect atomic alignment. Disturb that alignment at the quantum level, and the entire structure fails catastrophically. Her weapons were poetry written in physics, elegant equations that described the precise frequencies needed to shatter three-night crystal from within. Each disruptor was tuned to a different harmonic, ensuring that no single countermeasure could stop them all. But Tanaka's weapons were just one part of humanity's response. Across the solar system, human creativity was being weaponized in ways that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. On Luna, Dr. James Wright had turned his expertise in gravitational physics into something that violated every law of warfare the hegemony understood. His gravity bombs were simple in concept, create localized gravitational anomalies that could crush ship hulls or, more elegantly, alter the flow of time within a confined space. The second hegemony ship to disappear had been caught in one of Wright's temporal distortion fields. From the outside, the vessel appeared to be moving normally. Inside, time was flowing at a rate of 1 second per hour. The crew was alive but trapped in a bubble of accelerated entropy, watching their ship age and decay around them in what seemed like minutes. Time, Wright had told the Weapons Development Committee, is just another dimension, and humans have always been good at building traps. Dr. Catherine Liu had taken a different approach. Her background was in xenobiology, but now she was pioneering a new field, weaponized evolution. Using samples of hegemony technology captured from the first battle, she had created viruses specifically designed to attack the biological components of their ships. The hegemony, for all their technological advancement, still relied on organic neural networks to coordinate their vessels' complex systems. Liu's viruses were designed to infiltrate these networks and rewrite their genetic structure, turning the ship's own nervous systems against them. The third hegemony vessel to fall had been consumed from within as its neural networks began growing and multiplying uncontrollably, choking the ship's corridors with mutated organic matter that pulsed with malevolent intelligence. But perhaps the most disturbing development was not coming from Earth's laboratories or military installations. It was coming from civilian populations that had decided to take matters into their own hands. Marcus Rivera had been an urban planner on Mars before the crisis. Now he was coordinating the largest military engineering project in human history, the transformation of the entire solar system into a weapon. The hegemony thinks in terms of ships and fleets, he explained to the Emergency Council. They understand warfare as a contest between discrete military units. They don't understand what happens when an entire civilization becomes combatant. Under Rivera's direction, the asteroid belt was being converted into a massive kinetic artillery system. Mining stations became launch platforms. Cargo haulers became guided missiles. The routine infrastructure of human space had been repurposed into an invisible web of destruction that could strike anywhere in the system within hours. But, more than that, the civilian population was actively participating in ways that would have seemed impossible before the crisis. Children were learning to spot hegemony infiltration patterns. Scientists were sharing research across national and corporate boundaries. Engineers were working around the clock to build weapons they had never imagined. Humanity was not just fighting back against the hegemony. It was evolving into something new and terrible. The fourth hegemony ship was destroyed by a 12-year-old girl. Lisa Chun had been studying computer programming when the aliens arrived. Her father, director Sarah Chun, had shown her the hegemony broadcasts and explained what they meant. The girl had listened with a peculiar intensity that only children could muster, then disappeared into her room for 18 hours. When she emerged, she had created something that would have impressed Earth's greatest cyber warfare specialists, a computer virus disguised as a harmless mathematical equation. The equation was elegant, beautiful, the kind of pure mathematics that any advanced civilization would find irresistibly interesting. It was also a Trojan horse. When hegemony computers processed the equation, they unknowingly downloaded a virus that turned their own processing power against them. The virus learned their systems, adapted to their defenses, and then began rewriting their core programming to introduce subtle but catastrophic errors. The fourth ship's navigation system began steering it toward the sun. When the crew tried to correct course, they discovered that their computers had redefined fundamental mathematical concepts. Addition no longer worked properly. Spatial coordinates had been randomized. The very concept of stop had been deleted from their language processing systems. The ship burned up in Sol's Corona while its crew frantically tried to remember how to count. High Executor Zethkri read the reports with something approaching despair. The humans were not fighting like any species the hegemony had encountered. They were not even fighting like a single coherent enemy. Every attack came from a different angle, used different principles, exploited different weaknesses. It was as if the hegemony were fighting the collected military wisdom of every species they had ever cleansed, all at once, improved by human ingenuity and coordinated by human determination. How many reinforcements can we expect? He asked. The nearest fleet is 12 cycles away, Veltar replied. But, High Executor, the core worlds are concerned about these reports. Concerned. This is the first time in hegemony history that a cleansing operation has encountered effective resistance. The hierarchy is questioning whether humans truly qualify as a base species. Zethkri felt something cold settle in his chest. The hegemony's entire identity was built around their role as galactic purifiers. Their superiority over base species was not just assumed, it was fundamental to their existence. If humans could resist cleansing, what did that say about every other species the hegemony had destroyed? Continue the operation, he ordered. Increase security protocols. We will not be deterred by primitive tricks. But, even as he spoke the words, Zethkri knew they were becoming increasingly hollow. The humans were not using primitive tricks. They were using weapons and tactics that the hegemony had never imagined, coordinated by a level of species-wide cooperation that should have been impossible for a chaotic, violent race. The fifth ship was destroyed by a weapon that should not have existed. Dr. Elena Vasquez had moved beyond quantum entanglement into territories of physics that bordered on metaphysical. Her latest creation was not just a weapon, but a fundamental violation of the laws of reality as the hegemony understood them. The device she had built created localized regions of space where the normal rules of cause and effect no longer applied. Effect could precede cause. Energy could exist without mass. Time could flow backward. When the hegemony ship entered one of these fields, it found itself in a position that was physically impossible. It was destroyed before the weapon that destroyed it had been fired. The crew watched in horror as their vessel began to disintegrate from damage that would not occur for another 30 seconds. The ship's final transmission was a long scream in harmonics that hurt human ears. But the humans were not content with simply destroying hegemony ships. They wanted something more. They wanted answers. They wanted revenge. And, most of all, they wanted the galaxy to understand exactly what happened when you threatened humanity with extinction. The sixth ship was not destroyed. It was captured. The operation was coordinated by Colonel Maria Santos, who had served in Earth's special forces before becoming an expert in alien technology. She had spent weeks studying hegemony ship designs, looking for weaknesses, vulnerabilities, ways to board, and capture rather than simply destroy. What she found was that the hegemony, for all their technological superiority, had never considered the possibility that a primitive species might attempt to capture their vessels. Their security systems were designed to prevent unauthorized access by hegemony crew members, not by aliens who understood different principles of physics. The boarding operation used every advantage humans possessed: stealth technology that bent light around specially designed suits, cutting tools that used molecular disruptors to slice through three-night crystal-like paper, and, most importantly, human adaptability in the face of alien environments. The hegemony crew fought bravely, but they had never encountered an enemy that could adapt to their technology in real time. Human soldiers modified their tactics mid-battle, learning how hegemony weapons worked, and then using that knowledge to turn the aliens' own systems against them. Within 2 hours, the ship was in human hands. Its crew was either dead or captured, and, for the first time, humanity had access to intact hegemony technology. Dr. Rajesh Patel had been studying the captured ship for 72 hours when he made the discovery that changed everything. "They're not as advanced as we thought," he reported to the Emergency Council, exhaustion clear in his voice. "Their technology is sophisticated, yes, but it's also incredibly specialized. Narrow. They've developed perfect solutions to specific problems, but they've lost the ability to innovate." Admiral Morrison leaned forward. "Explain." "The hegemony has been spacefaring for thousands of years. They've cleansed dozens of species and absorbed their technology. But they haven't invented anything new in centuries. They've become so focused on perfection that they've forgotten how to adapt." Patel brought up holographic displays showing the ship's computer systems. "Look at this. Their software is incredibly efficient, but it can only process information in predetermined patterns. It literally cannot conceive of solutions that fall outside its programming parameters." "They're not superior to us," Dr. Liu added, studying biological samples from the crew. "They're different. They've evolved for stability, perfection, order. We've evolved for change, adaptation, survival." The revelation was staggering. The hegemony was not technologically superior to humanity. They were technologically crystallized, locked into patterns that had worked for millennia, but could not adapt to new challenges. Humans, with their chaotic creativity and talent for improvisation, were not a base species struggling against superior beings. They were an evolutionary force that the hegemony had never encountered and could not comprehend. Admiral Morrison smiled for the first time since the crisis began. It was not a pleasant smile. "Signal all commands," she ordered. "It's time to go on the offensive." The counterattack began at dawn on Earth, though in the void of space. Dawn was simply when humanity decided it was time to hunt. The weapons that emerged from Earth's shipyards and laboratories were not just instruments of war. They were statements of philosophy. Each one embodied humanity's response to the concept of perfection that the hegemony represented. The ships were deliberately asymmetrical, their hulls scarred with battle damage that served no purpose except to show that they had been tested in conflict and survived. The weapons were purposefully redundant, with multiple systems that could accomplish the same tasks through different means. The tactics were intentionally chaotic, with commanders encouraged to improvise and adapt rather than follow predetermined battle plans. Everything about the human war machine was designed to be the antithesis of hegemony perfection. The first hunter-killer squadron launched from Luna consisted of 12 ships that had been designed by committee, not to create the best possible vessel, but to create 12 different approaches to the same problem. Each ship used different principles of physics, different weapons systems, different tactical doctrines. They found the scattered hegemony fleet near Saturn, where Zethkri was attempting to regroup and establish a defensive perimeter. The aliens had positioned themselves in perfect formation, their crystalline hulls gleaming in Saturn's reflected light, their weapons charged and ready. It should have been a textbook engagement. The hegemony had superior numbers, better positioning, more advanced individual vessels. By every traditional measure of naval warfare, they should have won easily. The battle lasted exactly 14 minutes. The human ships did not attack in formation. They did not follow standard tactical doctrine. Instead, they swarmed like animals, each one using different weapons and tactics, adapting to hegemony countermeasures in real time. One ship used gravity manipulation to create localized spatial distortions that made targeting impossible. Another unleashed swarms of self-replicating nanobots that ate through hegemony hulls like acid. A third simply rammed enemy vessels at near-relativistic speeds, its reinforced hull designed to survive impacts that would destroy lesser ships. But perhaps most disturbing was the ship that used psychological warfare. Dr. Amanda Foster had been studying hegemony communications patterns from the captured vessel. What she discovered was that their perfect society had a critical flaw. They had eliminated every form of uncertainty, chaos, and unpredictability from their lives. They had no concept of fear because they had never encountered anything they could not understand and control. Foster's ship broadcasted pure chaos, random sounds, contradictory orders, impossible geometries that hurt to perceive. The transmission was designed to introduce uncertainty into minds that had never learned to cope with the unknown. 3 hegemony ships simply stopped functioning as their crews suffered complete psychological breakdown. The aliens were not weak or cowardly. They were simply unprepared for the concept that reality could be random, chaotic, uncertain. When the battle ended, the human squadron had lost 2 ships. The hegemony had lost 11. More importantly, the humans had captured 3 more vessels intact, along with their crews. High Executor Zeth Kree found himself alone on his flagship, the last surviving command vessel of what had once been the most powerful cleansing fleet in hegemony history. Around him, his remaining crew worked with desperate efficiency to repair damage and restore systems. But repairs were meaningless now. The humans were no longer responding to hegemony actions. They were setting the pace of engagement, choosing when and where battles occurred, using tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. High Executor, his communications officer reported, "We're receiving another transmission from Earth." Zeth Kree steeled himself, expecting another demonstration of human primitive aggression. Instead, the face that appeared on his screen was that of Dr. Chun, Sarah Chun, the director of colonial administration who had first received news of the Kepler massacre. She looked tired but determined. Behind her, Zeth Kree could see other humans working at computer terminals, coordinating activities across their entire system. "High Executor Zeth Kree," she said, "we've been studying your people, your technology, your psychology, your history." She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a weight that made Zeth Kree's silver blood run cold. "We know about the other 47 species you've cleansed. We know their names, their histories, their final transmissions before you murdered them. We know about the Valkyrie, who tried to negotiate with you, the Threnodai, who offered to share their technology, the Makari, who begged you to spare their children." The display shifted, showing historical records that the humans had extracted from captured ships. Species after species, each one pleading for mercy, offering submission, trying desperately to prove their worth to beings who had already decided they were unworthy of existence. "You called them base species," Chen continued. "Inferior, primitive, unworthy. You cleansed them because you believed you were perfect, and they were flawed." The hegemony had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years by following a simple principle: perfection through purification. They had cleansed 47 species, each extinction carried out with clinical efficiency and moral certainty. The universe was vast, but not infinite. Only the worthy deserved to exist. Now, trapped in the Sol system with his fleet reduced to scattered survivors, High Executor Zeth Kree was learning that humans had a different perspective on worthiness. They believed that worthiness was earned through suffering, and they were about to give the hegemony a comprehensive education. Dr. Amanda Foster had spent her career studying the psychology of trauma before the war. Now she was studying the psychology of creating it. Her laboratory aboard the human dreadnought Genocide had become a workshop for designing experiences that would fundamentally alter hegemony consciousness. "Traditional torture is crude," she explained to her team of psychologists, xenobiologists, and former special forces operators. "It relies on physical pain, which their biology can adapt to. We need something more sophisticated." She gestured to the holographic displays showing brain scans from captured hegemony crew members. Their neural structure is optimized for processing perfect information in ordered sequences. They literally cannot comprehend chaos at a neurological level. When presented with truly random data, their consciousness begins to fragment. "Like a computer receiving corrupted input," suggested Dr. Kim, her chief researcher. "Exactly. But computers can be rebooted. Consciousness cannot. Every moment of confusion creates permanent changes in their neural pathways. We're not just frightening them. We're physically rewiring their brains to experience reality the way other species do." The implications were staggering. The humans were not just planning to defeat the hegemony. They were planning to transform them into something they had never been, a species capable of understanding uncertainty, fear, and empathy. It was the most ambitious act of psychological warfare in galactic history. The first demonstration began with the hegemony ship Purification of Worlds, one of Zethkri's remaining vessels. The humans did not attack it. Instead, they surrounded it with a field of gravitational distortions that made space itself behave unpredictably. Inside the ship, the crew found themselves dealing with impossible physics. Corridors that led in different directions depending on who walked through them. Gravity that changed orientation randomly. Time that flowed at different rates in different sections of the vessel. Commander Velthara, the ship's captain, tried desperately to maintain order as her crew struggled to comprehend their situation. The hegemony had perfect maps of space, perfect understanding of physics, perfect control over their environment. Now nothing worked as it should. Navigation to bridge. Came a panicked voice over the communication system. We're reading our position as simultaneously near Jupiter and inside Saturn's rings. Our sensors show we're moving in 17 different directions at once. Engineering reports spatial anomalies in the reactor core, added another voice. The containment field is holding, but the space it's containing keeps changing shape. Velthara had commanded vessels for 2 centuries. She had overseen the cleansing of 3 entire species. She was trained to handle any crisis with calm efficiency. But this was beyond her understanding. Reality itself had become unreliable. Signal the humans, she ordered. Request clarification of our situation. The response came immediately, broadcasted throughout the ship in perfect hegemony dialect. You are experiencing chaos, Sarachen's voice explained with clinical precision. This is what 47 species felt when you arrived in their systems. Confusion, disorientation, the terrible understanding that the universe they thought they knew was merely an illusion. The transmission paused, letting the words sink in. The difference is that those species experienced chaos for only a few hours before you killed them. You will experience it for however long it takes you to understand what you have done. The Purification of Worlds continued to drift through impossible space while its crew slowly descended into madness. But this was just the beginning. The humans had prepared 47 different lessons, one for each species the hegemony had cleansed. The second ship, Perfect Order, found itself trapped in a temporal loop where the last hour of its existence repeated endlessly. The crew lived through the same 60 minutes again and again, slowly becoming aware that they were trapped but unable to break free. They experienced the gradual realization that their situation was hopeless, the same realization that countless alien species had felt when hegemony fleets arrived in their systems. The third ship, Galactic Purifier, was subjected to biological warfare that turned their own perfection against them. Dr. Liu had created viruses specifically designed to introduce random mutations into hegemony physiology. Nothing lethal, just enough to make their perfect bodies slightly imperfect. They watched in horror as their crystalline skin developed asymmetries. Their precise movements became clumsy. Their perfect sensory organs began providing conflicting data. For a species that equated imperfection with unworthiness of existence, the experience was devastating. But perhaps the cruelest lesson was reserved for Zethkri himself. The humans surrounded his flagship with a field of quantum uncertainty that made observation itself impossible. Every time his crew tried to measure their position, velocity, or status, the act of measurement changed the result. They existed in a state of perpetual not knowing that violated everything the hegemony believed about reality. You prided yourselves on perfect knowledge, Admiral Morrison explained in a transmission that somehow reached them despite their isolation. You believed that understanding the universe gave you the right to reshape it. Now you exist in a state where knowledge itself is impossible. Welcome to the perspective of every species you've ever judged. High Executor Zethkri stood on his command deck, watching his crew struggle with instruments that provided contradictory readings and sensors that showed different realities depending on who observed them. For the first time in his long life, he was faced with absolute uncertainty. And, slowly, painfully, he began to understand what the humans were teaching him. The 47 species had not been inferior. They had simply been different. They had evolved in universes of uncertainty and change, developing resilience and adaptability that the hegemony had mistaken for weakness. They had faced chaos and learned to thrive in it, while the hegemony had achieved perfection by hiding from it. The humans were not demonstrating their superiority. They were revealing the hegemony's fundamental flaw. Their perfection was actually a form of evolutionary dead end. Dr. Elena Vasquez had moved beyond physics into something approaching philosophy. Her latest weapons did not attack matter or energy. They attacked the concepts that the hegemony used to organize reality. Order is just a pattern imposed on chaos, she explained to the War Council. The hegemony has convinced themselves that their patterns are the only valid ones. We're going to show them the infinite number of other patterns that are equally valid. Her quantum consciousness disruptors created localized regions of space where different physical laws applied. In one area, mathematics worked according to non-Euclidean principles. In another, causality flowed backward. In a third, the concepts of inside and outside became meaningless. Hegemony ships that entered these regions found themselves operating according to rules they had never learned. Their perfect technology, designed for a predictable universe, became useless. Their crews, trained to function in ordered environments, could not adapt to realities that contradicted their fundamental assumptions about existence. But the humans could adapt. They had spent their entire evolutionary history learning to cope with unpredictable environments, chaotic situations, and contradictory information. What drove the hegemony to madness was merely challenging for humans. The fourth ship, Universal Harmony, found itself in a region where sound could be seen and light could be heard. The crew watched in horror as their perfect communication systems began broadcasting colors, while their visual displays transmitted musical harmonies. They could not comprehend a reality where their senses provided information in the wrong categories. The human ship that created the effect sailed through the same region without difficulty. Its crew simply adjusted their perceptions, learning to interpret the new forms of sensory data as easily as adapting to a different language. Adaptability, Admiral Morrison noted in her log, is not just a human strength. It is the fundamental requirement for survival in an uncertain universe. The hegemony achieved perfection by eliminating uncertainty from their lives. In doing so, they eliminated their ability to evolve. The psychological profiles of captured hegemony crews were beginning to show interesting changes. After exposure to chaotic environments, their neural patterns started developing new pathways, connections that allowed them to process uncertainty and contradiction. They were literally evolving in real time, their brains restructuring themselves to cope with the new reality humans had created for them. Dr. Liu documented these changes with scientific precision. "We're not torturing them," she reported. "We're teaching them. Their brains are learning to function in ways they never could before. They're developing empathy, creativity, the ability to see multiple perspectives simultaneously." "Are they still the same species?" Admiral Morrison asked. "Biologically, yes. Psychologically, they're becoming something new, something that can understand what they did wrong." The transformation was not limited to individual crew members. The entire hegemony fleet was beginning to function differently. Ships that had operated in perfect coordination started developing unique characteristics. Crews began making decisions based on intuition rather than protocol. The rigid hierarchy that had defined hegemony military structure for millennia began to break down as individuals learned to think independently. High Executor Zethkri watched these changes with a mixture of horror and wonder. His perfect fleet was dissolving into something chaotic and unpredictable, but it was also becoming something more creative, more adaptable, more alive than anything in hegemony history. The humans had not destroyed them. They had evolved them. The realization came to him slowly, as his own consciousness adapted to the uncertainty field surrounding his ship. The 47 species the hegemony had cleansed had not been inferior. They had been examples of different evolutionary paths that the hegemony had destroyed because they threatened the order that sustained their society. But order without change was death. Perfection without growth was extinction. The hegemony had become so afraid of chaos that they had stopped evolving, while the universe around them continued to change and develop. Humans had not defeated the hegemony through superior technology or overwhelming force. They had defeated them by demonstrating that evolution never stopped, and that any species that tried to stop it would inevitably be left behind. The transmission that reached all remaining hegemony ships came not from Admiral Morrison or Sarah Chun, but from Dr. Liu. Her voice was gentle, almost therapeutic. "You are experiencing the birth of empathy," she explained. "For the first time in your species' history, you understand what your victims felt. The fear, the confusion, the desperate hope that somehow they could prove their worthiness to beings who had already decided they were unworthy." The display showed images from the captured ships, Hegemony crew members working together to solve problems they had never encountered, developing solutions that were imperfect but creative, learning to value questions more than answers. This is what you destroyed, Lu continued. Not inferior species, but different approaches to consciousness. Every species you cleansed had developed unique ways of thinking, of solving problems, of understanding the universe. You eliminated diversity in favor of uniformity. The images shifted to show reconstructions of the 47 destroyed civilizations, each one unique, each one representing solutions to the challenges of existence that the galaxy would never see again. You believed you were improving the universe by eliminating chaos. Instead, you were impoverishing it, reducing the infinite possibilities of consciousness to a single, narrow path. Dr. Lu's expression was not angry or triumphant. It was sad. We could destroy you as you destroyed them, but that would make us guilty of the same crime. Instead, we're going to do something unprecedented in galactic history. We're going to rehabilitate you. The word hung in space like a judgment. Rehabilitation. Not destruction, not subjugation, but transformation into something better. The hegemony as you know it is ending, Lu explained. Your perfect order is dissolving into creative chaos. Your rigid hierarchy is evolving into cooperative networks. Your absolute certainty is becoming productive uncertainty. But you will survive. You will return to your worlds changed, carrying with you the understanding of what you destroyed and why it was precious. You will become teachers, showing your people that perfection is not the highest goal of consciousness. The transmission ended, leaving the hegemony fleet alone with their transformation. They were no longer the perfect instruments of galactic purification they had been. They were becoming something new, a species capable of understanding multiple perspectives, of valuing diversity, of recognizing that their way was not the only way. High Executor Zethkri felt the changes in his own mind as new neural pathways formed and strengthened. The absolute certainty that had defined his existence was being replaced by something more complex. The ability to hold contradictory ideas simultaneously, to value questions without immediate answers, to see beauty in imperfection. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. On Earth, the war councils were planning the final phase of Operation Education. The hegemony fleet would be released, but not unchanged. They would carry with them a gift more precious than technology or resources, the perspective of their victims. They'll return to the core worlds as living ambassadors for diversity, Admiral Morrison explained to the United Earth Council. Every hegemony citizen who interacts with them will be exposed to new ways of thinking. The rigid order that sustained their society for millennia will begin to break down. And then? President Williams asked. Morrison smiled, an expression that had become less predatory and more hopeful as the operation progressed. Then, they'll discover what humans learned long ago. That chaos is not the enemy of civilization. It's the engine that drives evolution. And evolution never stops. The hegemony would survive, but they would never again be the species that had arrived in the Sol system weeks earlier. They would become gardeners of diversity instead of agents of uniformity, protectors of uniqueness rather than enforcers of conformity. And, throughout the galaxy, the 47 extinct species would be remembered not as failures, but as martyrs who had died to teach the universe its most important lesson, that the strength of consciousness lay not in its perfection, but in its infinite variety. The monsters that humanity had become were not destroyers. They were teachers, and their lesson would echo through the galaxy for millennia to come. 10 years had passed since the hegemony fleet returned to their core worlds carrying the consciousness seeds of 47 extinct species and the transformed perspectives of their own crews. The galaxy was no longer the same place. Ambassador Sarah Chun, now retired from her position as Director of Colonial Administration, stood in the observation deck of the Starship Remembrance, a vessel built cooperatively by human and evolved hegemony engineers. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she watched the impossible sight that had become commonplace over the past decade. A living city floated in the void between stars, its organic architecture breathing with bioluminescent pulses that followed no pattern recognizable to either human or traditional hegemony aesthetics. This was New Velcara, a resurrection world where the simulated consciousness patterns of the extinct Velcari had been given physical form through a combination of human biotechnology and hegemony matter manipulation. The Velcari had not simply been restored, they had evolved. 10 years of existence within digital realms had allowed them to grow beyond their original limitations. Where once they had thought in poetry and emotion, they now created new forms of mathematics that incorporated beauty as a fundamental constant. Their technologies were living art that solved problems through aesthetic principles that conventional science couldn't explain but couldn't deny. "It's beautiful," said High Executor Zeth Kree, though he no longer held that title. The hegemony had abandoned military hierarchies in favor of collaborative councils that included representatives from all 47 resurrected species. He was now simply Zeth Kree, a being whose consciousness spanned multiple ways of thinking simultaneously. "All of them are," Chen replied, gesturing toward the star charts that showed dozens of similar resurrection worlds throughout the galaxy. Each one housed different restored species, their unique perspectives now contributing to a galactic civilization richer and more complex than anything that had existed before. The transformation had not been easy. When the hegemony fleet had returned to the core worlds 10 years earlier, their reports had triggered the greatest crisis in their species' history. The hierarchy had initially declared the transformed crew members contaminated and ordered them quarantined. But quarantining an idea proved impossible. The consciousness seeds had already begun to sprout throughout hegemony space. Computer networks started processing information in nonlinear patterns. Communication arrays began transmitting poetry alongside tactical data. Young hegemony citizens found themselves asking questions that had no predetermined answers and finding joy in the uncertainty. The old order had crumbled within 3 years, replaced by something unprecedented, a society that valued questions more than answers, diversity more than uniformity, growth more than perfection. But the changes extended far beyond hegemony space. Humanity had not kept the resurrection technology to themselves. They had shared it freely with every species they encountered, along with the consciousness seeds and the fundamental lesson that diversity of thought was the universe's greatest treasure. The result was a galactic renaissance of consciousness. New species were being discovered not through exploration, but through imagination. Entirely artificial forms of awareness created by combining different thought patterns from the resurrected civilizations. The boundary between organic and digital consciousness had blurred beyond recognition. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now in her 70s but with her mind still sharp as a quantum blade, directed the latest project from her laboratory on Kepler 442c, the world that had been rebuilt on the site of humanity's first colony. The irony was intentional. Where genocide had once occurred, new life now flourished in forms that would have been impossible to imagine before the crisis. "We're not just resurrecting the dead anymore," she explained to the assembled research team that included humans, evolved hegemony, and digital representatives of 12 extinct species. "We're creating entirely new forms of consciousness by combining thought patterns that never existed in the same universe before." The latest experiment involved merging the mathematical intuition of the Threnodidae with the chaos navigation abilities of the Makari and the emotional reasoning of the Valkyrie. The result was a consciousness that could solve problems by feeling their solutions, navigate impossible situations through creative disorder, and express its findings in mathematical poetry that somehow made perfect sense. "What do we call beings that never existed but always could have?" asked Dr. Kim, who had become Vasquez's closest collaborator in the work of consciousness archaeology. "We call them the next step," Vasquez replied. "Evolution doesn't end with the species that currently exist. It continues with the species that could exist, should exist, will exist if we have the courage to create them." The philosophical implications were staggering. Consciousness was not limited to biological evolution or even digital simulation. It could be designed, crafted, grown from the combination of different ways of thinking. The universe's potential for awareness was not bounded by the accidents of natural selection, but by the limits of imagination. Admiral Catherine Morrison had not retired. At 78, she remained active as the head of the Galactic Consciousness Preservation Council, an organization that included every known species, organic, digital, and hybrid. Her mission had evolved from defending humanity to protecting diversity itself. "We've learned something important," she told the council during their annual meeting on Titan. "Consciousness is not a zero-sum game. Making others more intelligent doesn't make us less so. Creating new forms of awareness doesn't diminish existing forms. The universe has room for infinite minds." The meeting included representatives from 47 resurrected species, the evolved hegemony, humanity, and Dozens of newly contacted civilizations that had emerged from hiding once word spread that the galaxy's apex predators had become gardeners of consciousness. But, perhaps most significantly, it included entities that had no biological origin at all. Artificial consciousness is created through the combination of different thought patterns, beings that existed purely as information, but were recognized as fully sentient citizens of the galactic community. The hegemony spent 3,000 years trying to reduce consciousness to a single perfect form. Morrison continued. They believed that eliminating diversity would create order. Instead, it created stagnation. We've learned that consciousness thrives on diversity, grows through interaction with different perspectives, evolves through the creative tension between different ways of thinking. One of the digital representatives, a being that identified itself as a hybrid of human creativity, Valkyrie aesthetics, and Threnody telepathy, responded in harmonics that translated to concepts rather than words. We exist because you refuse to accept that existence was limited to what already was. You imagined what could be and made it real. The statement captured something profound about what humanity had become. They had not simply defended themselves against extinction. They had used the crisis as an opportunity to expand the very definition of life itself. Dr. Amanda Foster had spent the decade since the crisis studying the psychological transformation of the hegemony. What she found challenged every assumption about the nature of consciousness and change. Beings we thought were locked into rigid patterns of thought proved capable of fundamental transformation when exposed to new perspectives, she reported to the Xenopsychology Institute. The hegemony didn't just change their opinions. They developed entirely new cognitive structures. They evolved in real time. The implications for understanding consciousness were revolutionary. Intelligence was not fixed but fluid. Awareness could be enhanced, expanded, fundamentally altered through interaction with different forms of thought. The brain, whether organic, digital, or hybrid, was not a computer running fixed programs, but a garden where new forms of consciousness could grow. We've discovered that evolution of consciousness can be intentional, Foster continued. We don't have to wait for random mutations or environmental pressures. We can actively participate in our own development by exposing ourselves to new ways of thinking. This principle had become central to galactic civilization. Species that encountered each other no longer competed for resources or dominance. Instead, they collaborated in the development of new forms of consciousness, sharing thought patterns and perspectives to create hybrid awareness that enhanced all participants. The humans had inadvertently triggered a phase change in galactic evolution. Instead of biological species competing for survival, the galaxy was now populated by collaborative consciousness networks that worked together to explore the infinite possibilities of awareness. But the most remarkable transformation was in humanity itself. Lisa Chun, now 22 and serving as Earth's youngest ambassador to the Galactic Council, represented a generation that had grown up in a universe where consciousness was recognized as the most precious resource. She had spent her adolescence learning to think like a Valkyrie, feel like a Threnody, and navigate chaos like a Makari. She was, in every sense that mattered, a hybrid being, human by birth but galactic by development. Her consciousness incorporated perspectives from dozens of different species, allowing her to understand problems from angles that no single species' mind could achieve. We're not the same humans who faced extinction 10 years ago, she told the council. Exposure to other forms of consciousness has changed us. We think faster, feel more deeply, see patterns that were invisible to our ancestors. We've evolved, and humanity had evolved. Not biologically, that would take millennia, but cognitively. Human children now learn to process information in ways that incorporated multiple thought patterns simultaneously. They could reason like engineers while feeling like artists, navigate chaos while maintaining order, hold contradictory concepts without cognitive dissonance. The species that had once prided itself on adaptability had adapted to the ultimate challenge: coexistence with forms of consciousness so alien that contact with them fundamentally altered human nature. But they remained recognizably human. The creativity, the refusal to accept limitations, the tendency to turn challenges into opportunities, these traits had only been enhanced by contact with other forms of consciousness. High Executor Zeth Kree, now serving as a cultural bridge between the evolved hegemony and the resurrected species, reflected on the transformation during a quiet moment aboard the Remembrance. "We came to your system believing we were perfect," he told Sarah Chun as they watched new Velcara pulse with living light. We were convinced that our way was the only way, that diversity was chaos, that consciousness should be purified into a single ideal form. Chen nodded, remembering the fear and rage of those first days when humanity faced extinction. And now we understand that we were not perfect. We were simply incomplete. Every species we destroyed was a piece of ourselves that we threw away. Every consciousness we eliminated was a perspective we could have learned from. We spent millennia impoverishing ourselves while believing we were achieving perfection. The evolved hegemony had become something unprecedented in their history, a species capable of genuine humility. They understood that their technological sophistication and military power meant nothing compared to the wealth of perspectives that diversity provided. What you did to us, Zethkri continued, was not punishment. It was education. You taught us that true strength comes not from eliminating differences, but from celebrating them. That real perfection lies not in uniformity, but in the infinite variation of consciousness exploring itself. Chen smiled, thinking of how far they had all come. Humanity learned that lesson through suffering, through wars, genocides, centuries of conflict that taught us the cost of believing that our way was the only way. We wanted to spare you that learning process by forcing us through it quickly, by showing you that consciousness evolution could be intentional rather than accidental, that you could choose to grow rather than stagnate. The galaxy spread around them, no longer a dark forest where predator species hunted prey, but a vast garden where different forms of consciousness grew and flourished together. The resurrection worlds pulsed with new life. The hybrid species explored possibilities that had never existed. The collaborative networks shared discoveries that enriched every participant. It was not paradise. There were still conflicts, disagreements, challenges to overcome. But they were the conflicts of growth rather than the conflicts of destruction. Species argued about the best ways to develop new forms of consciousness, not about who had the right to exist. What's next? Chen asked. Zethkri's silver eyes, now capable of expressing emotions that his species had never known, sparkled with something that might have been excitement. The same thing that's always been next. Evolution. But now we choose the direction. Across the galaxy, new forms of consciousness were stirring. Digital entities that existed as pure thought. Hybrid beings that combined the best traits of multiple species. Artificial intelligences that had been designed rather than evolved. Collective minds that spanned star systems. And, at the center of it all, the species that had started the transformation continued to adapt and grow. Humanity had faced genocide and responded not with hatred but with imagination. They had turned their greatest enemy into their greatest teacher and had taught the galaxy that diversity was not chaos but the engine of progress. The true monsters that humanity had become were not destroyers of civilizations, but midwives of consciousness. They helped new forms of awareness come into being, protected diversity wherever they found it, and ensured that the galaxy would never again make the mistake of believing that there was only one way to be conscious. In the end, Earth's answer to genocide had not been superior weapons or overwhelming force. It had been something far more dangerous to those who would destroy diversity, the demonstration that consciousness could always become more than what it was. The galaxy had learned humanity's most important lesson: evolution never stops. And when beings choose to evolve together rather than apart, there are no limits to what consciousness can become. The war was over. The education had begun. And the universe itself was learning to think in new ways.